Chapter 7 Liberation. Ijik-Lur, second planet around its star in the five-world Ijik-Mon system. Fertile, rocky, verdant, metal-rich. Its only large body of water, the Gelmrin Sea, lay like an enormous open wound covering a third of the planet's southern hemisphere. Monstrous rivers edge wandering irregular paths down to its shores, their headwaters meager northern creeks, shallow, muddy scars. From a distance, Ijik-Lur looks as if it's being consumed by a titanic, parasitic growth. Krellikar flicks nervously at a fingernail, with a thumbnail from the same hand, gazes absently at the projection of the planet, floating in the middle of the cabin. A speaker squawks somewhere out of sight. They've been cleared for their final approach. The room darkens. Ijik-Lur glows, grows, seems to fill the entire enclosed space. The new Erodu homeworld. Other passengers talk around him in low tones, a near-constant murmur. The projected planet in front of Krellikar gets even bigger. Too big. It frightens him. This doesn't bother anyone else, he wonders. He squirms in his chair, looks around. No one else has a face. Their talking continues. Confusion and fear accelerate Krellikar's heart rate. He looks for his restraint release in a panic. His chest constricts with anxiety. His normally dexterous fingers slap uselessly at the restraint buckle as the glowing world in front of him swells. He looks around again. "This doesn't bother anyone else?" he yells out his concern, gesturing with a shaky open hand at the turgescent hologram of Ijik-Lur. The other passengers don't seem to hear him, or care. Laborers, beings from every corner of the wedge, paid to tame this primal untouched world for the Erodu. Laborers. Their talking continues. Their faceless skulls shine harshly, lit by the monstrous projection growing in the darkened cabin. Colored light fills Krellikar's vision. All he can see now is the glowing planet, Ijik-Lur. It touches the ceiling, keeps getting bigger, pushes through the bulkhead. Somehow, he can still see it all. He struggles frantically with his restraints. This is wrong! All wrong! He is choking, coughing, fighting down a dinner 4 hours old. His stomach's reaction to his nose's disgust. His eyes' repulsion. And to think, he had once considered the Erodu grotesque. The young Rayud sees him now. Its 6 legs bend low. Its arched back angles slightly forward. Its body tenses for violence. Its antennae wave back and forth for a few instants, and then the whole of its attention, the full focus of its 5 helmeted eyes, settles on the little engineer. They stare intensely at one another. Krellikar, frozen in place, his forearm stopped in the midst of wiping hot, bile-spiced drool from his sagging bottom lip. The Rayud, still as a statue, its sucker millimeters above the acrid steaming pool of its meal. Krellikar's stomach tightens again at the sight. He fights desperately to ignore the monster's creeping stench. A cloud passes over the moon. A slight breeze flows through the ravine. Long grass blades bend easily in its passing. A sharp green smell fills the air. The creaking sound of mate-hungry joapophores rises and falls. The ruin of a nearby bridge support stands black against the night sky. Ijik-Lur. Downwind of the Rayud, Krellikar holds his breath. Another breeze hits his face. If he inhales a more direct blast of the creature's odor, he fears it will incapacitate him. There is little mention about the force of their smell in all of the research he has done on the monsters. Their scent is distinct. That is all that is said. Distinct. Quite the understatement. Rayudas. Created by the Erodu. Genetically engineered. Erode stock. Altered. Hardened. Weaponized. Forged into expendable killing machines. Rayudas had no need for clothing, armor, or weapons. Able to consume a wide variety of plants, animals, and minerals, they had no need for rations. Intended as a pre-invasion force to soften Datubu-Inkgao infrastructure before Erode warships strobed into Datubu orbits. to settle a conflict whose origin was long forgotten. But something went wrong. No one knows what. No one knows how the Erodu lost control. Those records were never found. One thing was clear, however. Rayudas also had no need for masters. The Rayud Galactic Scourge. All at once, they were everywhere, throughout most all of resonated space, in ever-increasing numbers. Panic. Chaos. Adept at hacking PRF gates, they spread everywhere, fed on virtually everything, and expressed a special affinity for processed metals, an unqualified menace to every resonated community in the Wedge. Heavy industries faltered, bridgeways and roadworks fell apart, cities crumbled, infested economies spiraled into terrified depressions. Vidcast recordings of the Galactic Scourge play through Krullikar's mind as he and the creatures stand locked in each other's gaze. Rayudas had shown no respect for the life of any member of any other species. The little engineer coughs lightly as a small amount of bile trickles down his windpipe. The Rayud's antenna twitch upwards almost imperceptibly, as if it's tempted to smell his cough. It probably is. Krullikar slowly moves his arm away from his mouth and slowly raises his hands in the air as he lowers himself into sitting cross-legged on the muddy, grassy ground. He knows he has no chance of outrunning the creature, so instead, he attempts to calm his breathing while his mind obsesses over the Scourge. Rayudas terrorized the galaxy for 9 days, a full week. Then the Gixin Jail descended upon the federated territories of the Erodu supremacy like wrath made real. The Erodu homeworld was first. Yawalu Aendi. Assailed by the first host of the Galactic Navy, Yawalu Aendi shook with tectonic force. Its outer core spat onto its surface through mountainous rifts carved into its mantle. Blackened clouds filled its skies. At the end of 3 minutes, every bit of life on the planet had been destroyed. Fearful of a galaxy-wide coup d'etat, the Jillith apex of the Daedalian issued a wedge-wide broadcast, demanding the immediate and complete end to all Erode hostilities throughout the polygamous bond. Before the surviving rulers of the Erodu supremacy could convince the Daedalian of the actual situation, every Erode world in their native system had been sanitized. Once the truth of the Galactic Scourge was understood, the Gixin Jail suspended their hunt for the Erodu and communicated the real threat to every leader of every ruling spacefaring subspecies. The Rayudas now were the hunted, to the very last. Even still, they endured another 7 weeks, despite the might of the Daedalian and the combined military efforts of every government in the Wedge. Krullikar takes another deep, slow breath. Father's tests and trammels, even at their worst, had only inspired in him an overpowering conviction to master a challenge. Being face-to-face with a Rayud is a completely different experience. RDMs are problems to solve. They have fixed designs and patterns that can be discerned and exploited. Rayudas, on the other hand, are living, high-functioning, ruthless creatures. You can't necessarily assume a logical interaction with any of them. And to really agitate Krullikar's sense of dread, the frontier's increasingly frequent reports of disappearing laborers play through his mind like a bad song. The only clue found at a missing laborer's last known location being a thin, heterogeneous slick of acids, dissolved minerals, and some of the victims' DNA. Just like victims of the Scourge. Krullikar has no idea if moving slowly is the correct course of action to stave off an attack when faced with a Rayud. And to compound his concern, he forgot the firearm the Erodu had given him in his bed trunk. So there is little else he can think of to do, given what he does know of the genetically engineered killing machines. Choosing to wear some of his custom detection and defense gear before he left camp weighs in his favor, but a decidedly more offensive option would have been more prudent. He'll have to add weapons to his checklist when going out on surveys from now on. The Rayud watches him settle to the ground, tensed for violence. An old Lenishay sits across from him, in the mess tent. The large reptilian's head jerks forward as she swallows half her mouthful of food.
I come here right after,
the old reptilian continues.
In the early days after the scourge.
The Lenishay shoves another sporkful of flash-cooked mush into her maw. Mealworms and sour greens. Talks around the food as she swallows another gulp of it down. Her head jerks forward.
The Welks bought the whole damn system,
she says. She slurps up another sporkful of mush into her half-filled maw. Teeth worn down like columns in a temple ruin.
Be nice to have money like that,
she jokes wishfully and slaps her 2 right hands down on the table.
Ha!
she exclaims. Krellikar chuckles quietly for the old Lenishay's benefit. The reptilian's dulled eyes twinkle with the success of her small joke.
Course, the Gixen okayed the whole thing, she declares.
Krellikar nods as he searches his own bowl with a spork, uncertain of whether or not the flasher killed all of his meal. Of course, he says. The old Lenishay nods back, appreciative of the young human's attention.
Of course,
she agrees.
Imagine the big lugs felt bad about destroying the Welks' homeworld and all.
Her head jerks forward again as she swallows. Scales glimmer in the tense fozlight. she concludes.
Bad case of mistaken identity.
Krellikar looks around for some sort of condiment, preferably something spicy. The mush smells terrible. Certainly was, he replies with dwindling enthusiasm as he thinks about how his bowels will probably react to this meal.
Yep,
the ancient lizard agrees.
Anyway, she continues, that's when I got here, when the Erodu began the colonizing.
The old Lenishay drives her spork back into her bowl of mush.
Scourge was officially over, and the Erodu wanted to make good for all the trouble they caused, she explains.
Krellikar knows the story, but talking with the old codger is good for his cover. He nods and reaches past the huge cyborg sitting next to him for a bottle of hot blue.
So they up and issue a standing bounty for Rayud hides, the Lenishay continues. Good for as long as the Welks run their own affairs.
Her bony, scaled head jerks forward with another swallow.
1,000 Murath a hide, the old lizard exclaims. Can you imagine?
She slams 2 hands down on the table again. Several heads turn in their direction.
These Welks sure know how to apologize, she bellows.
Krellikar grins with a poorly hidden lack of interest as he upends the bottle of hot blue over his bowl of mush. Immediately, it smells better.
1,000 Murath, the old lizard muses. Wouldn't buy no star system or nothing like that. But it sure as the bond make these old scales a lot happier. She slaps the table again. Ha!
Yes. The Erodu reputation is well on its way to recovery. Krellikar tunes out the old Lenishay's voice as he summarizes Father's account of the situation. 5 Jilith Galactic Standard months since the planet's purchase, and the colonization proceeds according to the Erodu plan. Smoothly. The old reptilian pauses. Krellikar looks the creature in the eye, nods knowingly. The old lizard starts up again. Krellikar resumes his review. 5 months. Then the collapse of a newly built bridge near a frontier camp not far from the primary Erodu settlement. All signs point to a Rayud cause. The area is immediately evacuated and carpet-bombed. Days later, surveillance drones report no Rayud sightings or suspected activity. Still, the Erode colonists worry. A Wyoming nomad and 2 humans take a seat on the bench to Krellikar's right.
Pass the hot blue, the avian says.
Eh? Krellikar looks over, startled out of his reverie.
The hot blue, the nomad repeats with a bit of impatience.
Oh, Krellikar hands it over. Right. Yes. The Wyoming nomad takes the bottle and grumbles with annoyance at the delay. The old Lenishay, annoyed herself at the intrusion, resumes her conversation where she left off. But the focus of her attention now is the cyborg to Krellikar's left. The little engineer himself watches the avian drown its meal with sauce, then looks with unseeing eyes at his own bowl of mush. Retraces his line of thought. The Erode colonists worry. Despite the standing bounty, if word gets out that Rayudas have returned, and on the new Eurodu homeworld no less, it might lead to a violent galactic backlash against their species. At the very least, it will kill whatever goodwill they've regained by establishing the standing bounty. They need to find a quiet solution, and they need to find it quickly. They find Uriah Chiolem, father, genius, inventor, obsessive RDM engineer, celebrated for his ability to find innovative and elegant solutions to his clients' problems, known for his unwavering ethical indifference, and for his absolute professional discretion. The Erodu pay for an expensive PRF directly to their first hive on Ijik Lure, and purr and cajole Father to solve their little pest problem. Father assesses the challenge and the client, and demands payment up front. The Erodu supremacy is widely known to have been bankrupted in the aftermath of the Scourge, and Father does not work for free. The Erodu balk at the suggestion. Their contract negotiations sour, and the Erodu foolishly attempt to coerce Father into their service. He escapes, flees Ijik Lure, returns home. The huge arthropods don't respond or pursue, but that means little. Though Tialadenem Nalu is officially uncharted and difficult to get to even if its location is known, the Erodu supremacy is a patient monarchy. They will eventually find the man, and he will learn then the full extent of their displeasure. Krellikar arrives on Ijik Lure 6 days later under an assumed identity. He is immediately sent to the frontier with the rest of the alien laborers. The Erodu are loath to face the Rayudas themselves, and in lieu of a better solution, they throw waves of other species at the frontier, hoping the desperate immigrants will, in the act of taming the planet, eliminate the monsters of the Scourge. Krellikar takes another deep breath, consciously works to steady his nerves. Half an hour has passed, and neither he nor the Rayud has made even the smallest of movements. Krellikar breaks the stillness. "What is your name?" he asks. The Rayud jumps forward impossibly fast at the first sound of Krellikar's voice. Its arms extend for maximum striking force, its blade-like fingers spread wide to distribute the greatest amount of damage over the broadest possible area. Krellikar has barely enough time to tap out the activation sequence for the EMP on his phantom harness and scramble out of the way before the Rayud closes the 4-meter distance between them. The EMP. Not only is it effective against electronic devices, but as Krellikar found one day when he was on the wrong side of its emitter, the pulse is strong enough to create a temporary interruption in the cognitive functions of living beings at close range. The Rayud blacks out. Its legs fail and its head slams into the ground. But before it slides to a complete stop, its neurons reassert their connections, and the creature launches back into motion with disoriented fury, slashing over and over at the place Krellikar had just been. In the middle of its attack, it stops. Its horribly sharp claws vibrate with the savage anticipation of a kill. Krellikar marvels in shock at the ferocity of the Rayud's attack. His mind races with every strategy he can think of to stay alive. His heart pounds away at the insides of his ribs. A very physical wave of fear washes over him, overriding any thought or feeling much more complex than fight or flee. "Stop!" Krellikar screams at the monster. Then he cringes at the mud-brain lack of sophistication in his attempt to quell this violent turn of events. The creature, however, backs away to a distance of about 4 meters again. A surprising concession. But despite this accord, the Rayud retains its defensive posture, arms out to the side of its arching armored body as a warning not to approach, head retracted defensively to the underside of its carapace, and antenna swinging wildly about until it can steady its vision. Krellikar straightens and slowly raises his arms above his head once more. The EMP is a nice trick, but it's limited to a single use, a final option. Now he'll have to find a place to recharge his phantom harness. In the meantime, he'll have to try not to get butchered. Hopefully, the Rayud doesn't have a clue as to what Krellikar used to stun it. That uncertainty, if these creatures are uncertain about anything, might buy him some time. He clears his throat and determines he'll have to do something about his reaction time as well. Had he been careless enough to leave his gear at camp, and had this creature been less hesitant at the beginning of their encounter, he'd have become yet another missing laborer. Another thin, heterogeneous slick of acids, dissolved minerals, and some DNA. Krellikar makes a brief calculation of how much Muroth he'll need for a quality genetic mod to enhance his mind's recognition, reaction time, and his body's muscle speed. His chest constricts with anxiety at the result. A few seconds later, his agitation wanes enough for him to use his voice. He has no other options. "I am not here to fight!" Krellikar squeaks. "I just want to talk!" His voice cracks with tension.
"Safigalo Baladenyao Bochim,"
the creature says thickly. It shakes its head a little and blinks heavily. Still dazed by the EMP, it slowly extends its armored head back out to find and focus on Krellikar. Its blister-covered mottled shell and slightly smaller size, the only obvious physical differences between it and a Yerodu. A few heartbeats pass. The Rayud remains still, its eyes locked on Krellikar's. It offers nothing further. Krellikar spent his first week on Ijik Lur, struggling with being off Tialadan M. Nalu for the first time in his life. He struggled with his different weight, the different light, the different air. He struggled not to appear too reclusive, but he also didn't want to be seen as too social. Mostly, however, he struggled not to leave Ijik Lur, struggled not to attempt to disappear. Not only was this his first time off his home world, it was also his first time outside of Father's immediate sphere of influence. The very thought of it was enough to tempt Krellikar to recklessness, to unhindered exploration. Yet, he stayed. Father had been very clear. This was to be his rite of passage. If Krellikar could construct a suitable response to the Yerodu's disrespect, then he would be free to strike out on his own. He would not be sought after, and no more tests would be demanded of him. But he was not to leave Ijik Lur until the task was done. Insubordination would not be tolerated. Krellikar knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Father had ways to determine his location, and if he left Ijik Lur without completing his assignment, he knew Father would learn of his disobedience, and he knew Father would find him. Krellikar shudders at the thought and refocuses on the task at hand. He must resolve this interaction with the Rayud and resume his mission to punish the Yerodu. Krellikar opens his mouth, then closes it to search for something better to say. Finally, he resolves to ask, "Do you speak Udo-Gensalat?" The Rayud interrupts him with a sharp hissing to reject any further discourse in the Gixin Jail's native tongue.
"Safigalo Baladenyao Bochim,"
it repeats, then continues in the formal Yerodun.
"Is my name,"
with a voice less thickened by confusion. "Ha!" Krellikar acknowledges. He didn't fix the Yerodu language the night before he set out for Ijik Lur, though he wouldn't be able to use or understand the various pheromones and airborne chemical signals of the race. "I see," he replies, using the familiar Yerodun. Then he tries the name for himself. Safigalo Baladen. Before Krellikar can recall the rest of the creature's name and work out how to say it, the Rayud interrupts him again. A light fog of scent-heavy mist puffs out from its rear.
"Safigalo Baladenyao Bochim."
Krellikar bunches his lips at being interrupted in the middle of his effort, but he realizes the creature seems more interested now in conversing than it seems to want to kill. A smile tugs down at the corners of the little engineer's lips at this incremental success. "Bochim," he says, echoing the Rayud's last words. "That's quite a mouthful of a name you've got there. Can I simply call you Bochim for short?" The creature shakes its head.
"My name is Safigalo, for short,"
it corrects in the formal Yerodun. "Of course, Safigalo," Krellikar turns the name over in his mouth. Safigalo. He looks back to the creature. I am going to lower my arms now. I mean no harm. I just want to talk. One of Father's most important principles is to analyze a problem in its totality, from all angles. Only then can one conceive of an appropriate solution, and it occurs to Krellikar that he's been thinking of only half the problem on Izhik Lur, thinking only of the Erodu. It dawns on him now that any solution excluding the Reudas would be completely inadequate. And the Gixin Jail, of course. It would be a ruinous mistake to leave the Wedge's masters out of the equation. One shouldn't forget how the first Erodu homeworld met its end. My name is Krellikar. Krellikar. The Reud lingers on the middle of his name, its posture a bit more relaxed, longer, lower to the ground.
Why are you here?
Safigalo asks. Krellikar's smile curls fully across the bottom of his face. The moon shines again, bright in the night sky, and the young Cholem's perfectly realigned teeth show a light blue in the darkness. What Father meant by construct a suitable response to the Erodu's disrespect was a mystery, an instruction left purposely vague for Krellikar to resolve, with the understanding that the design of an appropriate solution for this task, this job, was the most important part of his rite of passage. This was what Father was celebrated for, his ability to read a client, then craft a novel, efficient, and effective solution that precisely fulfilled the client's desires. Accordingly, Father would never allow Krellikar his independence until he too proved astute with this skill. When his days on Izhik Lur lengthened into weeks, and when those weeks lengthened into more than a month, Krellikar had begun to despair. He'd been spending every waking moment racking his brain, trying to figure out how to satisfactorily avenge Father's pride. But after analyzing every weakness of the Erodu's primary settlement on Izhik Lur, every retributive exploitation he could imagine seemed too direct, too obvious, nothing Father would ever approve of. Krellikar needed to devise something subtle, something without apparent orchestration. However, his solution also had to be something perceived clearly as a consequence of failing to deal equitably with Father by any potential future clients. The Erodu, Krellikar was told, were no longer to be respected. They were to be considered an enemy species. Father was certain they were disseminating false versions of their interactions with him, smearing his reputation, though he revealed no source for this opinion. Nevertheless, the animosity Father felt for the Erodu had to bear deadly fruit, and meeting this Reud had given Krellikar the beginnings of an excellent idea. Why is he here, the Reud wants to know? The little engineer looks directly at the middle of the creature's eye bank. To destroy the Erodu, he answers.